Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about reflexes. So let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now, when we're talking reflexes, first thing we want to do is establish, hey, what we're talking about. And that's fairly easy to do. We've all experienced reflexes. We probably have multiple every day, and even some that maybe we don't even think about. And they can come as, from as drastic as a situation where you step on something sharp or something warm, or there's just a lot of ways. But what we're going to really doing is breaking down the individual sections when it comes to the information being processed and reactions made. Even though it's a super quick, and that's one of the properties you can see there, super quick process. I mean, you can't even put a stopwatch on a reaction when you touch something that's warm or step on something sharp. Just how quickly the process unfolds. But the four properties: stimulation. It's got to have some sort of stimulus. I mean, you don't want your reaction just occurring just because. You don't want your hand jerking up just randomly throughout the day. That's just you don't want that. People are going to talk. But they're involuntary. I mean, you don't want to, if you truly step on a nail or something sharp. I mean, you don't want to think about what needs to happen. That's too long. You got to get that up. And then the word stereotype, obviously that's something that's something you don't want to do in regular life. But it's just, in this case, it's a reference to it's the same way every time. The same thing happens. That way the muscles have the fine-tuned response to it, and it occurs flawlessly. All right, so what we're going to do now is to start to get into some of the nuts and bolts, to break down what's going on with the reflexes. And this screen here is just a reminder that the information is going to process the same way. It's just done so in a quicker manner, and we've taken out one big aspect, and that's the brain. We no longer use the brain as the deciding, what's the word I want to use, is the one who makes a decision on what to do. That's the integrating center, which is just simply not so much a decision to be made, but as to where the decision needs to go to. But it happens the same way. You've got your receptor somewhere, skin, muscle, tendons, wherever. The afferent nerve fibers carry it away to the spinal cord. Then it goes through what's called the integrating center. We're going to see a diagram of that here when we start looking at the individual reflexes. I'll point that out. It goes through the gray matter, as we talked about, and then the integrating matter determines which afferent neurons need to be used. And then, of course, in the efferent neurons, as we've heard about, that carries it back to whichever muscle needs to be enacted. And one thing we're going to see is that there are several layers of this. And for the most part, one of the ideas is balance. I mean, if you truly do pull your foot up off the ground, your body has to make sure that the other leg is prepared for that, or else we're going face first, and we could actually fall on the very object that you just are trying to get away from. So, or it could be in a worse situation. So we're just going to see all kinds of things. And there's going to be a lot of things that overlap, but we'll point those out. We'll break those down. All right, so on this screen, we're going to talk about some properties of a reflex, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of things going on. We talked in a couple of videos ago about all the messages that have to be sent in order to, as a wide receiver running down the field in the sprint, looking back, holding their hands up, and then catching a football. Same with an outfielder who's running down a deep fly ball. Same thing with reflexes. Man, there's a lot going on in a short amount of time, just to make sure everything is going on. Let's see. So not only the reflex occurs, but you got to think about other things, as we've mentioned. A lot of this is on the screen. Again, there's a bunch, and you're going to want to capture it all. But some of the highlights is the fact, and it's number 2 there, that during this reflex, the body has to stay upright. I mean, you can't be falling over. That's counterproductive. Yeah, it's just counterproductive. You don't want to fall over. I'm trying to think of something clever to say there. So whether it's lifting your foot up, whether it's moving your hands, whether it's some sort of other reaction to the stimulus, the reflex, it's got to make sure everything is going to be kept safe. And the last one, the reciprocal inhibition. One thing we want to think about is that when you are lifting your hand up, you don't want the antagonist muscle putting it back down. Just like if you were to open your hand and then it closes, or close it and then it opens, you don't want the antagonist muscle or the opposite muscle working as well, which is what it does in a normal work situation. So there's a brief period of time that is shut down, and then of course the idea of extensors or flexors. Extensor muscles is the ones that do the first job, and then the flexors are the one that return it or work opposite of that. And we'll talk about those in individuals. And in some cases, one muscle could be an extensor in one case, and it turns around in the next situation, it's the flexor. It's all situation dependent, but we're going to talk about each of those, and then we'll get into that. You can see the word monosynaptic reflex there. That's a reference to when only one synapse is used to get this job done. And there's polys, and there's lots of other things, and we'll talk about all those and their examples. All right, our first reflex to look at is just the old simple. Hopefully you've experienced this to understand what's going on. You're at the doctor's office and they're testing your reflexes. They're not really seeing it. They don't really care to see if you can move your leg. If it's not a paralysis test, but that the proper neurons for reflexes are firing. And so you've got a breakdown here. You can see the 1 through 6, and I'm not going to read, or actually it's 8. I'm not going to read, or 7. I'm not going to read those to you. You can do that. But I'm just going to explain what's happening and where the important parts are. And so we start off with our extensor flexor. The diagram obviously is beside me here. At the very bottom down there at number 1, it points to the muscle fiber above the other fiber. The one on top, that's the extensor. The one below is the flexor. It's the one that's going to return the leg. So when that leg, that kneecap or right below the kneecap is tapped, and that leg kicks up as a response, the flexor is the one that brings it back down. Now the part that's kind of towards the middle, that little white opening, the white obviously is a tendon, that's connective tissue. What that's showing you inside of that's a muscle spindle, and muscle spindle is our next video. We'll break it down even more what it is, but it's essentially a sensory receptor. It's a proprioceptor that we've talked a couple of times about. One of the functions of the proprioceptors is that they remind or they alert the brain as to the progress of the motion and how things are going. But they also, and we'll see a breakdown of them when we talk about them, but they're also full of efferent and afferent nerve fibers. In other words, they're sending messages out, they're receiving messages, and those messages would have to do with, if we need to correct the behavior or continue the motion, whatever it might be. But in the reflex arc, you can see, if you look at the cross section of the spinal cord there, in the old butterfly, the gray matter, you can see the green and the red and the blue, the little circles there. And again, if that's too small to make to really or see it, as always, it's in the PowerPoint. It's in the textbook, so if you want a bigger image, just simply pause here and open one of those up. But where those circles are, that was the integrating center that we were talking about earlier. That's where the decision is made on what needs to be done. So, and you can see that it goes into the gray matter, decision is made, and then right back out the posterior root and right back to whatever the muscle it needs to be. So you can see the part that's left out of the decision-making process, or the process, is the brain. And you may be saying, well, I can see the word it says to brain up there. Yes, the brain does get a report about what happened, but it's not part of the decision-making process of what's going on. Now this is so looking at this diagram, the left-hand side, especially if you split the spinal cord symmetrically in half, left and right, the left side of this diagram is all about the extensor muscle, and in the back half, the right-hand side, is all about the flexor muscle and the response. Because if in this situation, especially if you were standing and for some reason your leg had to kick out, the flexor would need to bring it back down to kick that reflex. Now, and you may think, okay, when would this come into play in real life? Well, it's just the idea of maybe being startled, something on the ground, and the reflex is to kick out at it to move it away. I know I've been involved in a few situations where maybe you're just walking or jogging, maybe you got some music on, and then a dog appears from the side, whatever, and you just catch a glimpse of it out of your eye, and you react. You can have a couple of reactions. Some people may just be jumping away. Me, I tend to be a put the foot out kind of a person, if that's really a type of person. But then you got to put that foot back. So the right hand side is getting that flexor muscle back. Now going back to it, it's part 4 up there, and we're going to talk about a couple of specialized neurons. In this case, it's the alpha. We'll talk about the gammas later on. But alpha neurons, they're a part of this process. Alpha neurons are specialized because they are quick responders. In other words, if you need a quick message sent, alpha neurons are what's used to get that back. They're built for speed, for lack of better terms. We'll talk about gammas later on. They're about fine motor control, but we'll talk about them in the right situation. But that's the idea of the process, the muscles, spindles, their part, the alpha neurons, the right hand and left hand side. And because we've got different things going on, okay, this would be a monosynaptic. It's only going through the one synapse to get the action done. But we're going to see some polysynaptic situations. Okay, so I back up because I got ahead of myself there. The idea of getting that leg kicked up, that would be the monosynaptic part. But then the process of putting it down, that would be a poly, because now we're using two synapse to make that happen. So a lot of times we're going to see these words, and you may say, okay, what's an example of a monosynaptic arc? What's an example of a polysynaptic arc? And they can be working in tandem. It can be a part of the same reflex. So it isn't that I can point to a reflex and say, all right, that type of reflex is monosynaptic, that type is polysynaptic. Monosynaptic is essentially going through the first synapse to get it through, and then the polysynaptic is the second one to get the complete job done. But just lifting of the kicking of the leg, that would be monosynaptic. The returning of the leg would include polysynaptic work. All right, our next type of reflex to look at is the withdrawal, and in this case, when we say withdrawal, we're saying pull away from. So the hand on the burner, the stepping on something sharp, those are all withdrawal. Maybe, and it could even be, it doesn't have to be something sharp. You could be, on a hike in the woods, and your next step is going to land you on a copperhead, and you snap your leg back up, pull it back up. Or some people can be, you're walking in the woods and you step on a stick and it snaps. That can startle some people, and the leg comes up. You can be walking somewhere where maybe it's fairly dark, and maybe you touch something that causes your hand to pull back. Maybe it's spider web or something wet, maybe, or just whatever. A lot of things can cause the withdrawal reflex. And then again, there's a lot of things to information there. You want to be sure to capture that. But it's also a example of, and you can see the color-coded diagram. And in this case, when you look at the cross-section of the spinal cord, you see a lot of things going on, because there are multiple levels happening here. Because in this case, now your leg is up, okay, and the body has to be prepared for that, or else we're just going to topple over. So the left side is all about getting that extensor muscle away from the stimulus, and then the right hand side is all about the flexor muscles, making the needed adjustments for that, so you don't just topple over. And of course, it shows hamstring and quads, but it'd be more than that. Your foot would have to be involved, your calf muscles. There's situations where you have a reaction like this, and then your calf muscles feel a little soreness because of just the quick tenseness, quick contraction that they go through. But again, getting the flexor muscles to work, that would be the polysynaptic part of what's going on. And we'll talk about the balance part on the next screen. Alright, so when it comes to keeping your balance, and again, so we're talking the right hand side of the cross section of the spinal cord there. So the action has already been made through the primary afferent and efferent neurons, and now we're into that secondary level. Again, but you can see that lots going on. The IC, the integration center, has decided that, hey, we also got to get something else going on, and we're going to talk about reflexes, types of reflexes at different arcways, and this would be one that would be cross. What's the E stand for? Cross extensor. Yeah, it's right there in front of me. And so this would be a contralateral reflex. In other words, you just got to work different parts of the body to make sure that things happen. With the idea of just, in this case, not falling over. If you are jumping back away, then again, maybe your arms come into play to keep the balance. Whatever's got to happen, the body is equipped to do multiple pathways to make sure that everything is all right. All right, so the tendon reflex, and again, this is another example of, it's not a reflex all by itself. I mean, your tendons don't just reflex, but it's part of most of the other reflexes, because as we know, if a muscle is going to move, then a tendon is going to be a part of that. And again, you can see that this is the quickest one, and they're tendon organs, which is the second word down on the list for the diagram over there. But essentially what's happening here is as part of a reflex, so this could be on the extensor muscle that has to contract to pull away. This could be on the flexor muscle that's accommodating the action. But essentially what's going on is that the tendon organs, which you can see over there, those are receptors. Okay, again, the proprioceptors, again, they are alerting the brain as to what's going on, but they're also receiving information, making decisions. I shouldn't say making decisions, carrying out the decisions that have been made, with the idea of keeping you safe. I mean, if you don't want overwork or overload. You want just the right amount needed. So they're simply just there to kind of make sure we don't over stress and injure ourselves. But that's the idea of tendons. But again, this is part of other reflexes. It's a small part of other reflexes. And our last screen here, again, these are types of arcs, and again, these are parts of the reflexes. So they're not individual things; they're things within things. So, like for example, an ipsilateral arc. That's the idea of that first reaction. In some cases, it's only one reaction. Like if you're taking your hand off a burner. There's not a lot of balance that needs to go on or reflexive. I mean, you may also pull your head back, get your whole torso back, but a lot of times just getting your hand back. I mean, if you've ever played that game where you slap hands, you got your hands up and you're trying to slap somebody's hands, you can pull your hand back as part of the game. You don't really move any part of your body, but you're just reacting to their movement. So, but that's an ipsilateral arc. Just one motion is going on, and we looked at the cross extensor. That's a contralateral reflex arc. In other words, now two things are going on. We've got the first action, but then we got a second action to counterbalance the first action. And again, lots of information above me there. Just be sure to capture it all. But the most interesting one, in this case, the other two we've already talked about, but one we haven't mentioned yet is the intersegmental reflex arch. That's one in which the input and output are at two different levels. So you put your hand in cold water and you weren't expecting it, or maybe you were, like you're getting in, like for me, we get into the pool quite a bit, and maybe it's been cooler the last few days, or we've even had a rain that cools the water off. You get in there, and that initial reaction to the cooler water is to what? Inhale, right? You quick, like that. That's a intersegmental reflex arch, because it may just be your legs that are in the water, maybe your hand. Your legs are in the water, but the whole abdomen responds to that. That's an intersegmental. Where the stimulus was, one of the reactions was somewhere else, in a different level of the body. You could also, you feel something with your foot and you move away from it. But the abs is a good example of that. But it's just the idea of the reaction is somewhere at a different level of the body than the stimulus. Well, that's our video over reflexes. When when we get together next time, we're going to be talking about the muscle spindles. So we'll see you then.